Hey, everybody, and welcome to a Cosmic Psychology course. I know you guys have been waiting for this. If you have followed me from the social media TikTok space, this is an extension of this course. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Kame Nicole. Everybody knows me on TikTok as Sunflower Shaman, and I am an esoteric teacher who moonlights sometimes as a spiritual advisor. But I did really grow my claim to fame, I shall say, by how can I say this? How by sharing my experience on plant medicine. So yes, I am a shaman. And in this particular course, we're going to do a review over the Psychedelic Gospels. And then we're also going to point out some very, very, very interesting texts within the biblical book regarding plants and some events that took place. So if you find any of this information useful, go ahead and give my video a thumbs up. I would appreciate it so much because it helps me grow within the YouTube space. If you liked what you see here and you want to see more content like this, please hit that subscribe button. And if you want to be notified after you've liked and subscribed to my channel when I post new content like this, then go ahead and hit that notification bell. So let's get into it. First and foremost, we're going to talk about the fact, if you're new here, that the biblical text is a dramatization of metaphorical stories that have deep symbolic meaning. And this was something that the ancients did in order to really describe the natural events that were occurring during that time. I feel like some of the stuff too was a little bit of entertainment because they was very much into the theaters back then. And then also a lot of this largely, you see my head shaking, largely to really talk about in a roundabout way what they were experiencing or hiding within these secret societies, okay? And again, if you are familiar with my content, then you know we have talked about Jesus, Moses, and Solomon, I think, and Jacob to the ground. We've talked about them to the ground. We're going to talk about them small to the ground. But if these people did actually exist, that's Jesus, Moses, Solomon, Jacob weren't their real names. In fact, they were names, whether it was in Greek or Hebrew, to represent solar luminaries, to point out the enlightened state of consciousness that one experienced when they were engaging in certain rituals and events within the secret mystery schools. And the thing about this is that when it comes to the text and what it really means and everything, we have to really take into account that none of this stuff we were able to actually hear about until the Rosetta Stone was deciphered. And until that Rosetta Stone was deciphered, where people were able to actually translate and read what the hieroglyphs were actually saying, they ran amok with that text as well. So there's a bunch of different speculations that's going on as to why the text is the way that it is. But what we can put together out of all of it is that it has deep symbolic meaning. It can't be literal and symbolic. They were used as metaphors to describe persons, places, or things. As I say a lot of times in my live on social media, it's like a movie. They may have filmed in real places, but the story and the characters were changed. Same basic concept here. So we're going to go ahead and jump into the Psychedelic Gospels. And the Psychedelic Gospels, as you can see, is about the secret history of hallucinogens in Christianity. And this was written by a married team, Jerry B. Brown, with his wife, Julie. And I said that like I knew them on a first name basis, but you know, the universe be universing. So I may one day. So the Psychedelic Gospels, again, was written by Jerry and his wife Julie. And Jerry in particular is an anthropologist and an entomologist, and he actually got his doctorate from Cornell University in 1972. His wife Julie, I believe she is a psychotherapist and a health coach. And so this particular book is about their scholarly accounts through Europe on their 40th anniversary. So it was really important for me to do research and kind of give you guys a little bit. That's the only backstory I'm going on now. Okay. I give you a little bit of backstory about who these authors were, because it was very important for them. And they talk about this in the book. It was important for them to have a, what how I want to say, they wanted to have a trip that was meaningful, and like they weren't just going on another trip across Europe for their anniversary. Again, this was the big 40. So as you can see here, they not only visited churches, but they visited sacred sites. And they started out at the Rosalind Chapel in Scotland, where a portion of the Da Vinci Code was filmed, and they worked their way down to Turkey, as you can see. Now, important thing that I want to point out here, and they do briefly discuss about this in this book, is that art back then was a really big deal when it came to religion, because of the fact that everyone could not read and write. Yes, Christian art and religious art in general was had the illiterate in mind. For those who couldn't read, didn't want to read, wasn't privileged to read. So it's kind of a big deal, actually, that they were able to find the things that they were able to find along their entire journey on this trip. So as we're going to go through what they found, and again, I'm not going to go too deep into the book because I want people to really read it. It's really good, especially if you're interested in plant medicine, ever been curious about plant medicine, or if you have like some moral issues surrounding plant medicines, because of what man did anyway. But what they found was that more than 400 cultures worldwide had religious practices that induced an altered state of consciousness, and this included morning glory. I know people who don't think like morning glory has LSD properties, but morning glory has LSD properties. And that you see, they started out with the Aztec in Mexico. They went down to the Apache with the peyote. We have the air god for the Elysian devotees in the honor of Demeter. If you don't know, that is associated with the Greeks. Demeter was one of the 12 Olympians and one of the 12 children of Zeus. Okay. And then you see how we even went all the way down to Russia, where we have the reindeer who were consuming the actual mushrooms, and the deer herders were drinking the urine of the deers to consume. So that's how potent that mushroom was, that the deer couldn't consume it. They would excrete it through urination, and someone could drink that urine. It's pretty gross. But people could drink that urine and still have some hallucinate or altered state of consciousness. I really don't like the word hallucinate, because every psychedelic does not cause hallucinations. I have this whole thing around talking about plant medicine, sacred plant medicines anyway, in a certain way, because it just feeds further into the stigmatization. So this is what they found. And what's interesting really about the deer eating the mushrooms in Siberia in Russia is how they treated the, not treated, but dried, you can use the word treated the mushrooms, okay, in the actual, when they went to go hang them dry, because when anybody who's into cultivation, when you cut them, you have to dry them out, and you have to do it within 12 hours, or pardon me, or they will rot. Okay. And so they hung them upside down on trees. Where the Christmas tree ornament came from was actually the hanging upside down of these medicinal, mind altering mushrooms. So to further go into the story, and I'm going to start reading off my notes that I put here, because I don't even want to miss a beat. Okay. When I tell you that when I learned about Gordon Wasson and his wife Valentina, it really made me sick to my stomach. It really made me sick to my stomach, because of the actions of greed and success really hurt not only an indigenous community, but it really hurt a shaman. Okay. And a lot of people are probably familiar with the story, but not so far in the beginning of the book, but pretty much in the beginning of the book, we run into betrayal off the bat. So Gordon was signed, and his wife Valentina was passionate. They were passionate mycologists. I should not say mycologists, but mycology enthusiasts. Okay, Gordon was an American author, and he was also an entomologist who worked in banking industry for years. And his wife Valentina, she was actually a Russian pediatrician. So if you don't know what entomycology is, it is the study of the historical and sociological impact of fungus. So Gordon was a skeptic of the medicinal and spiritual benefits of these certain mushrooms until he had his own experience, which was in Mexico with the shaman Maria Sabina in 1955. And this is called Velada. It is a healing visual carried out by the Mazatec, I'm going to try to pronounce this, Correndero. We're going to go with that. That's what it was called. And so Maria was a very gifted shaman within her community, and her grandfather and her great grandfather were also shamans. And so she was known in her community for her abilities to not only use the mushrooms to communicate with God, but also use them to cure ailments. And when you read the book, she tells you about how she would get like direct communications after she's consumed these sacred mushrooms on how to heal people with particular ailments. It's a fantastic story. So Wasan was one of the first, was the first, not one of them, it was the first outsider to gain access to these particular sacred indigenous ceremonies. And he asked if he could take pictures and also record what was going on in the ceremonies. Of course, Maria being sweet, I can only imagine a shaman being sweet. So Maria being sweet, she said that he could, in the condition that he would not release any of the information that he recorded and received during this ceremony, because again, it was indigenous. There was a closed practice in a small community. This is why people gatekeep about closed practices. Gordon lied, of course. He lied. He made up some lie, which he further admitted about him needing to get back home, check on his son's whereabouts, his well-being, lies. And he took all of his information. He took some samples of the spores, took them back to Paris, where they were studied. They came up with their origin, the strata, everything, and then he wrote a book. He literally wrote a book. And not only did he write a book, he wrote a book and included the photographs, some of the things that was going on in the actual ceremony, and the actual location of where this indigenous community that had survived since forever before he ruined their lives. And he published it in Life magazine. He published it in Life magazine in May of 1967. And then, to add insult to injury, his wife Valentina had her personal account published in a different publication 6 days later. And it went into the hands of 12 million readers every single Sunday about this experience. And then in 1962, now I'm not sure people are familiar with the hippie movement of 1962. There was an influx in the United States. And after his publication, this article came out in Life magazine and in the newspapers about this book, and it talked about this experience. All of the hippies from the United States went over to the small little village in Mexico and ruined everything. Maria was accused of being a drug dealer. She was jailed. It threw off the entire social dynamic within the community. It really did harm with the community. And there are rumors that certain celebrities like Bob Dylan, even though there's no real physical evidence that he actually went over there to engage in any of these ceremonies, but it was a rumor. That's how big this whole thing got, because Gordon decided to choose notoriety notoriety and fame. And because of this, Maria was ostracized by her community. And as I said before, she was briefly jailed. Her house was burned to the ground and they murdered her son. And she later said that she regret that she had ever allowed Gordon Wasson into her space, into the community space. And she ended up dying. This is Maria over here in the corner, if you can see, with Gordon Wasson as he's taking his notes and recording everything. And she didn't speak English, mind you. She did not speak English. And so she ended up dying at the age of 91. And she died in poverty and very malnourished. Now, it was one bad act followed by another bad act of human beings within her community, where she died of complete poverty and malnutrition after they burned her house to the ground and then killed her son. So, and even after that, I get a little somber every time I talk about that, because every time I read this story, and I've read it several times since I've read this book came out in 2016, I feel terrible. I feel terrible. It's terrible. What happened to that lady? Because humans be humaning. So this right here, and I'll let you read it, was a statement that came from a retrospective essay in 1967 written by Gordon Wasson after he learned what had happened to Maria after he wrote his book and had it published. And he says that, he feels terrible about it. He couldn't believe it was going to happen, even though his research was being funded by the CIA. That's the irony in all of it. His research was being funded by the CIA. And if you don't know anything about the hippie culture, I did do this whole segment on my podcast, which I'm going to move to YouTube now. But if you don't know, the psychedelic movement in the 60s and the 70s, like, that was a segue into the whole war on drugs, where they started to really attack the minority communities within the United States. This is during the Nixon era, when psilocybin mushrooms, which is the magic mushrooms put on here, that was incorporated in that. And if you read some of the statements from Richard Nixon, he said, you can't make it illegal to go to war and you can't make it illegal to be Black. So what he did is he created this war on drugs to further dive into the minority communities and destroy the minority communities and the all of our leaders. And in addition to that, it segued into, and this came from the hippie culture, and then it segued into the crack epidemic, where a bunch of, as we all know, the government dumped crack into the minority neighborhoods. Okay, so with that being said, it's the irony that even before that happened in 1955, his whole pilgrimage over to Mexico, he was being funded by the CIA this is, like the Mexican armies, and then the Europeans, they went over there in so big droves that the Mexican army had to ban them from coming in there, because that's how much they were destroying that little community. And an old woman, and I'm sure she obviously, you see the previous picture, she wasn't old at that time. However, she died in poverty, but she was ostracized. So it was terrible. And I always get a little sentimental. And obviously he felt bad because he didn't realize what he was doing. And then all of these publications by him happened prior to him eventually having his own experience with the actual sacred mushrooms. So I'm pretty sure he really felt, because I'm a plant medicine mama and a shaman, I know the feeling that comes with guilt and the way that it really makes you take accountability for the things that we do in our life. So I can only imagine how sorry he really felt, even though it was kind of like it was still sketchy. So further along, moving along. So I ran into a really big problem when it came to finding the pictures, replicated pictures, I should say, that was actually within the book. And these are the only two photos that I could find. And the reason being is because some of these pictures that are in the book came from what Julie took while she was on her trip, while they were in Europe. Okay, so a lot of them they're not on the internet because they're in sacred spaces and cathedrals and everything. But two of them I was able to find was the Temptation in the Garden of Eden. And this is in a chapel in France of 1291. And as you can see, there's Adam and there's Eve. I don't know if you can see my little pointer where there's Adam. And then here's Eve. And then obviously here's this tree. I'm going to guess that's the tree of probably good and evil or knowledge. Gotta be the tree of knowledge. And then you can see it's clearly a mushroom with little mushroom sprouts on the side here. And then we move over to the healing of the leper that was found in England, England circa. I did it. I probably messed it up. I'm not re-recording because my editing skills ain't there. But this was from Paris, France, too. And as you can see, here's the leper. And if you read the biblical text, you know how many times they talk about lepers. I feel so bad for people who had diseases because they made martyrs out of the lepers. But you can see here, these are mushrooms. So we have two different instances. Again, this is only the pictures that I could find that's within the book. If you're interested in it, I will wholeheartedly read the book. Buy it and read the book and fight your local legislators about the legalization and decriminalization of sacred medicinal mushrooms. So to wrap up the chapter, because I didn't want to delve too much into the book, but the end of the chapter and what they were talking about when it comes to Jesus and the fact that the sacred mushrooms kind of disappeared after the era of Jesus is what they brought up the Gnostic Gospels. And they said in order to, or due to the lack of Christian art before the year 200, it forced them to look at the written text, even though all of, everybody else had art that had the sacred mushrooms in there. But not only did they have to look at the Gnostic Gospels, they had to look at the New Testament as well. And if you follow me on social media, I've talked about the New Testament, how it was written and translated from Greek. It was written in Greek, translated from Greek, and it was Plato and Pythagoras, who were Greek philosophers, all that. So, but what they notice, and if you don't know, I'll briefly go over Gnosticism because a lot of people aren't familiar with it. But the Gnostics were the early Christians. They were considered Coptics. They were considered Coptics. The Coptics were Egyptian, although they weren't all Egyptian. So they had pagan mysteries, and the pagan mysteries were burned like around the year 325. They were burned. What was found later in the Nag Hammadi, and the book actually talks about the Nag Hammadi a little bit, were what was left over. So the Catholics went and they killed the early pagans and accused them of witchcraft, when they were actually followers of Jesus, and they murdered them. And so what they found within this text is that Jesus didn't come to save everybody from their sins. He was coming to teach enlightenment. As you can see here, I put on the slide, Jesus did not come to save humanity from sin, but to teach enlightenment. They found that the Gnostic Gospels also taught about self and the divine being one. They talked about self-knowledge is the knowledge of God. And if you ever experienced plant medicine, then you would know that as well. They even say that in the in the biblical text, how the kingdom is within, how if a person gains wisdom, they love their soul. They even, and if you don't know about the Nag Hammadi, there was the Gospel of Thomas that was found in there, and Thomas was Jesus's brother. Thomas in Greek, and both Greek and Hebrew mean twin. But if you follow me and you know more about my work, and you take the Cosmic Psychology course, you know that Jesus and Thomas represent two states of consciousness. So an insert that they found about from the Gospel of Thomas, and the Gospel of Thomas is nothing more than sayings of Jesus, by the way. And one of them said, Jesus said, if you become my disciples and listen to my words, these stones will minister to you. For there are 5 trees for you in paradise, which remain undisturbed summer and winter, and whose leaves do not fall. Whoever becomes acquainted with them will not experience death. Now, let's go back to the very first sentence of that, where he says, if you become my disciples and listen to my words, these stones will minister to you. If you did not know, sacred mushrooms are not only called magic mushrooms, but they're also known as the philosopher's stone. They're known as the philosopher's stone. And if you ever experience the healing and the ancient knowledge and wisdom that comes in from tapping into that space, they definitely will minister to you. Now, this is a direct insert from the Gospel of Thomas. And again, it says, Jesus said, if you become my disciple and listen to my words, these stones will minister to you. And it says, for there are 5 trees for you in paradise. The number 5 in mysticism. If you take the Cosmic Psychology course, I'm going to put the link in the description box so you can click on there and take it. It's a membership course where it's modules uploaded every single week for you to learn. So the number 5 in mysticism means sacrifice. It's the 5 sense man. We all have 5 senses. Okay. So it's 5 senses that must be sacrificed to become one. That is the God. I couldn't figure out what to do with my hand. It's my first time using this. I couldn't figure out what to do with my hand. It's the 1. 5 to 1 ratio. 5 must become 1. Okay. And it says that for there are 5 trees for you in paradise. 5 must become 1 in paradise, which will remain undisturbed summer and winter. We have 2 equinoxes. Well, that's not even summer. It's the spring, which is the vernal equinox, and then the autumnal, which is fall. Okay, it's that, because I gotta go back and research that. I gotta go back and research that. So it says, whoever becomes acquainted with them will not experience death. Another thing with that comes with the fact that when you break that glass ceiling on the sacred mushrooms, on the sacred plant medicine, when that glass ceiling is broken, you realize that death is an illusion, and how fear has been engraved into every fiber of your being since you've been in existence into this realm. Okay, so it doesn't even stop there, because then when we start going into the biblical text, and that's just one. Hold up, that's just one. So let me pull up, and you guys won't be able to see this. But there is another insert that they included in the book, just to wrap up that book, and go back to the Gnostic Gospels, just to wrap up the ending of that book. They pointed out another quote from Jesus in the Gospels of Thomas. And it says, Jesus said to his disciples, compare me to someone and tell me who I am like. Thomas said to him, Master, my mouth is wholly incapable of saying whom you are like. Jesus said, I am not your master, because you have drank, you have become intoxicated from the bubbling spring which I have measured out. He who will drink from my mouth will become like me and shall become he, and the things that are hidden will be revealed to him. Now, two things that I want to point out here, and they talk about this in the book, but from experience, I know, excuse me. Thomas said to him, "My master, my mouth is wholly incapable of saying whom you are like." Jesus said, "I am not your master because you have drunk." Whether it is mushrooms, whether it is ergot, whether it is Igbo, when you are working with indigenous plant medicines, oftentimes they are in a liquid form as a libation or a tea to drink. And that's precisely what has happened there. Because you have drunk and you have become intoxicated from the bubbling spring, which I measured out. You have every time someone takes in or ingests any of these sacred plant medicines, it needs to be properly measured out. It needs to be properly measured out. So they were definitely, and again, I'm going to reiterate this. This is from the Gospel of Thomas, which are the sayings of Jesus. And so what's important about this is that if you know, you know, and that's definitely what they were doing. That's definitely what they were doing. So then when we go to the biblical text and we look at Exodus, right? We look at Exodus and we look at Moses in the Great Escape or the Great Exit, right? Because exit means exit. There is nothing, literally nothing in existence today that's more similar to the universal food or the bread or the food of the gods, which is manna, than mushrooms. Nothing in existence today, I'm going to reiterate, that's closer to sacred mushrooms than manna. That's in a biblical text. And then we have it here in Exodus. We see chapter 16, verses 14. It says, "When the layer of dew evaporated, behold, on the surface of the wilderness, there was a fine flake-like thing, fine as most on the ground." In Exodus 16:15, it says, "When the sons of Israel saw it, they said to one another, 'What is it for?' For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, 'It is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat.'" In Exodus 16:16, it says, "This is what the Lord commanded, gather of it every man as much as he should eat. You shall take an omer apiece, according to the number if persons each has in his tent." Then in Exodus 16, verses 17 through 19, it talks about how the manna, specifically manna, was measured. And they grabbed a lot, some grabbed a little. Moses told them not to leave it until the morning. Why is that important? Why is it important? It's important because in the Old Testament, many passages describe manna's physical qualities and conditions associated with its appearance, but we never learn exactly what it was or where it came from. A reference to manna appears in the book of Exodus when the children of Egypt are fleeing of Egypt and following Moses into the wilderness. I'll explain what the wilderness is in my Cosmic Psychology course, because that's important. But as you can see on this slide, I'm like collecting my thoughts. As you can see on this slide, and up here at the top is also, these are dried mushrooms. These are dried, edible, consumable mushrooms. And they look almost identical to manna in the way that it's described. And not only is manna talked about in Exodus, but it's also mentioned in Hebrews. It's also mentioned in Psalms. It's brought up in the Gospel of John. and in the book of Revelation. And in addition to that, Jesus refers to himself as the bread many, 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 many times. I personally believe that Jesus was the mushroom. Just like some people say that Buddha was the mushroom, and there is a whole picture of Buddha sitting underneath the mushroom. I think that these people were mushrooms. My personal opinion. But it is round. The manna is round. It is found on the ground in the dew. Wood melts to mush if not dried or collected in time, and it breeds larvae, which is very, very, very specific to mushrooms. And when it dried, it was like wafers of bread, and its color was like a correlate seed. If I pronounced it wrong, I pronounced it wrong. And the consistency and color of dried mushrooms. These are the same characteristics, as I said again, of mushrooms, and that's why I put the picture up at the top. Now here, when we go over to the New Testament, we have in the book of John, Jesus giving a sermon after feeding 5,000 people, comparing God's gift of body nourishing manna to his own ability to eternally nourishing the soul by calling himself the living bread, which I explained in a previous video, which came from heaven. Okay. The contradiction in the Gospel of John, though, which states that the bread of Moses was given to the Israelites, was not from God. However, in Exodus chapter 16, verses 12 through 14, it states how God heard the rumblings of the sons of Israel and told Moses that they will eat meat at twilight, which is night, and bread in the morning. And they woke up, and there was manna on the ground that was covered with dew, and Moses tells the Israelites rather, that this is the food from the Lord. So there's a little contradiction that I threw in there because I'm going to do a whole segment on contradictions within the biblical text. But as you can see, there's just many, many different references here to bread, it being universal substance of the gods, and it's just so many descriptions of it being exactly like a mushroom. And then we have in Islamic passages, they compare truffles to manna as well. So it's not just Christianity. Again, over 400 cultures have been engaging with these sacred plants. But then when we go further along within the text, Moses was upset because they didn't listen. Now, remember in the previous slide, when we first began, we discussed that manna has the same characteristics as mushrooms. I said that like 5, 6 times now. When dry, it was like wafers of bread, and its color was like the coriander seed. I'm going to leave that there. And it had a consistency and color of dry mushrooms. In this text right here on the screen, it appears to spontaneously just regenerate overnight. Now, if you know anything about medicinal mushrooms or sacred mushrooms and how they're grown and how they're taken care of, they grow so fast that it seems like they grow overnight. That's how fast they grow. And again, as I said in the previous slide, if you do not, I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but if you do not dry them out after you cut them or separate them from their roots, they will rot. Okay. So, and it grows in large quantities, which is another big indication like, okay, we have now the Gospel of Thomas that is considered apocrypha because it didn't fit the narrative of the Bible. And then we have other Islamic passages that's letting us know that their truffles are considered or was referred to as like the manna of the desert. And then we have the Zohar. The Zohar is a foundational work of literature of Jewish mystics who is thought to known as the Kabbalah. It includes aspects of the Torah, which are the 5 books of Moses, which discuss the nature of, I don't think that's supposed to be in there. It is not supposed to be in there. That is from class, and I am not editing that out. I'm not editing it out. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. But to go back from that, because I do recycle my slides. Okay, if you're looking for perfection, do not come here, because it's not about being perfect. So, but you have multiple sources, and you have multiple sources in the biblical text alone that suggests, hey, something is going on here. So now when we go to the book of Numbers, the book of Numbers 11, chapter 11, verses 6-9, it says, manna is yet again discovered or described very closely to mushrooms. And those are my words. I'm just reading my notes. It's still with, I have typos. I really need to check this stuff. And it says, I looked up the word do in other biblical resources, and I could not find anything significant for the word do. So if you follow me and you're familiar with my content, then you know that I do like to look up specific words. If I see something that is repetitive, I look it up, because chances are when you're reading this biblical text and you're trying to find the hidden gems, the symbolic meanings of it, I always teach my students that if you're looking at something in replication, it's probably significant finding. And so I looked up the word do, and I couldn't find anything outside sources of it. However, what I do know, again, from personal experience, when it comes to cultivation, when you are recreating an internal environment, like you have your fruiting chamber, because I am a mycology enthusiast. So when you have your fruiting chambers, when it comes to these medicinal mushrooms and everything, you have to replicate how they would naturally grow outside. Because if you didn't know, they grow out of poop naturally, in addition to logs and things like that. And so what you'll have to do is you'll have to fan it to keep that oxygen exchange going, and then you also have to mist it. So the way that it falls, and you don't directly mist it on top of the mushrooms, because you'll make them rot. If there's too much moisture, you'll make them rot. And because their body is, consisted of a certain amount of water anyway, it's not good. But when you do that, it falls down like a mist, like a dew. So for me, that was a clue. But unless you know anything about mycology, replicating, growing spaces, or anything like that, then you don't know that this is what this is talking about. That's the do. That's do. And again, I looked up the word do, no symbolic meaning. So it must literally mean like a mist or dew that falls over the ground. They were finding mushrooms out in the wilderness, because back then they were all out into the wilderness. Now I know what you're thinking. I know that you're thinking, okay, well, you're basing your approach on knowledge and comparing it to the biblical text, and you're doing your own math. But here's the thing. Entheogen comes from the Greek, and it means to generate or create the God within. Entheogen is a chemical substance, typically of a plant origin, that is ingested to produce a non-ordinary state of consciousness for religious or spiritual purposes. And while the use of visionary plants is not considered spiritual by many people, they believe that spiritual experiences must come directly from God, and that the use of visionary plants contradicts the biblical teachings. But what I've just showed you, that in the biblical teachings, not only do we have it in art, but we have it in literature, that they were definitely ingesting sacred plant medicine. And not only were they doing that, they were trading drugs for sex. And here, as we slowly wrap up this first segment, again, subscribe to my channel if you like what you got here. But Jacob, and y'all know how much I talk about Jacob, okay? Jacob, it's not even about Jacob. It's really about Rachel and Leah. And if you didn't know, Jacob had 2 wives. His 12 sons, which are the 12 tribes of Israel, who are the 12 zodiac signs. Take the Cosmic Psychology course, because it's about you and the universe inside you. They were born of 2 mothers. Leah had Reuben. Reuben was going mandrakes. Rachel, Jacob's second wife, wanted some of Reuben's mandrakes. And Leah was like, is it not enough for you to sit up here and take my husband, but now you want to take my son's mandrakes too? Like, what's up with you? And then Rachel was like, okay, well, if you let me have some of the mandrakes, you can sleep with Jacob tonight. They made the exchange. Now, before I move to the next slide and I talk a little bit more about mandrakes, I just wanted you to know that after Leah ingested the mandrakes and she slept with Jacob, she became pregnant and gave birth to Jacob's 6th son, whose name is coincidentally Zebulun, who became he was the founder of one of the 12 Israelite tribes. Remember I told you the 12 tribes of Israel, 12 zodiac signs. And Zebulun is a constellation that is associated with the zodiac sign of Capricorn of old, who represented the tail of the fish and is known by astronomers as the son of Neptune. Take the Cosmic Psychology course. But when we go and to discuss Mandrake, Mandrake is of the nightshade family. And the root of it is not only a narcotic or necrotic, but it's also a hallucinogen that has hypnotic effects. Now, while there's no direct correlation between, Jacob taking the mandrake, because it just said Leah took the mandrake. But as you see in the previous slide here, where I have Jacob wrestling this angel, after that, after he had slept with Leah and Leah ingested the mandrake, Jacob saw an angel and wrestled with the angel and asked the angel his name, and the angel wouldn't give him his name. And the reason why the angel wouldn't give him his name is because Jacob already knew the angel's name. But coincidentally, this also happened after the mandrake, that Jacob saw God face to face and named him Peniel. He took a stone, a single stone, and named it Peniel. Remember about the book of Thomas? Where Jesus said, if you take these stones will minister you or minister to you. Okay. So I just wanted to point that out. But then this is my own research about all the notable people, just to wrap up the course. This is my own research about the notable people that we know who have contributed their success to drugs. Now, am I telling you to take drugs? Absolutely not. I'm not telling you to do that at all. Never telling you to do that. However, what I am saying though is that a lot of people, Bill Gates is one of them, he was exploring with LSD. Some people do it, I don't do it. We have neuroscientists, okay? We have Carl Jung, who, I mean, everybody know who Carl Jung is, who also experimented, but he experimented more so because he was like, well, everybody's talking about they're having these enlightening experiences. In order for me to know what these people are talking about, I got to try it myself. Okay? Watson and Crick attributes his discovery of the DNA, of the structure of the DNA, to his trip on LSD. And then we have other notables such as Steve Jobs, Timothy Leary, who was known as the godfather of psychology, and like he was was this godfather of psychology or the psychedelic movement? Probably both. because he was the one who got up during the hippie era and told everybody, hey, drop out. You don't need any of this. War is stupid. You don't need these books. You don't need this education. You don't need any of this. Drop out. He was an Ivy League professor saying this. And again, he got his LSD from his students. So, and then we have other notables who contribute to ketamine, which now, if you don't know, if you're not aware, that since they are starting to legalize and decriminalize psilocybin or the psychedelic mushrooms, they are also, which just to solely line Big Pharma's pocket, they are also funding this ketamine treatment now. Okay, because ketamine therapy is called, is supposedly being very great with treating people who have depression, anxiety, PTSD, different kind of drug addictions, alcohol addictions. It gets rid of smoking sensations or quitting smoking, things of that nature. So we have so many successful people, real people, that attributed all of their success to their use on drugs, expanding their mind. And I'm not gonna even call them drugs, especially not mushrooms, because you don't take or do medicine, you sit with plant medicine. However, these are mind expanding substances. Okay, mind expanding. Alice in Wonderland is a notorious story about an acid trip. I'm sorry, I'm looking up here. I'm looking down here because I don't know which way the camera goes. Okay. But what I can tell you, as we finally close this out, is that your body on drugs, you can produce DMT in your lungs. We naturally produce DMT in our lungs. We naturally produce DMT in our pineal gland. We naturally produce psychedelics. Okay? We do. And therefore, since we do, this is why breath work is important during meditation. Even the dog's restless. Even y'all know how my dog, if you follow me on my TikTok, then you know that my dog gets restless and he be popping up and making, guest star appearances and stuff. But going to bed, and in the way that you can get this, if you're interested, and I may do a specific video on this, but if you're ever interested in actually how you can further induce, because this is why lucid dreaming, vivid dreaming, you produce more melatonin at night as well, and from the pineal gland, and then the DMT obviously from the pineal gland is small amounts, but it exists, and you can do certain things to make it more come out of it. So just like going to bed on an empty stomach, your body is spending less time on digesting the food when you're not eating before bed. Helps with the producing of DMT naturally, and also helps you to achieve deeper states of meditation and a strong connection to your higher self. Okay? That way you tap into infinite intelligence. That's how you do that. That's when people say, so when people get on my TikTok and they're like, oh, well, yeah, you have, sacred plant medicine or whatever. And I just do meditation. To each their own. I can get there the fast way, or I can take the long way. But I do both. So whatever combination works for people works for them. But again, I'm not telling you to do any drugs. If you want to naturally stimulate the DMT within your body so you can tap into your higher levels of consciousness, then you want to focus on meditation and breath work. You want to start going to bed on an empty stomach, or not eat so close to bedtime to where your stomach isn't focused, your body isn't focusing on excuse me, I don't know what's wrong with me with this today. Digesting your food. Okay, so that's going to end this lesson. I hope you guys learned something. I'm sorry if I was all over the place. Again, please like and subscribe to my channel and hit the notification button if you want to learn more. And don't forget to drop me a comment. Let's talk about it. Open discussions. Till next time, guys. See you later.